"I'm taking my clothes off," said the giant bride. "Don't." But she did, and he couldn't move. Witness this unbelievable true inspired story right here on Whisper of the Past. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Let's get started. It began in the small mountain town of Aspen Hollow, Colorado, a place that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Wooden cabins dotted the misty valley, and the old church at the center of town still rang its bell every Sunday morning, even though only a few dozen people ever showed up anymore. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, or thought they did. Ethan Cole wasn't like the rest. He had moved to Aspen Hollow from Denver 5 years earlier, tired of the city, tired of noise. A sculptor by profession, he'd built a quiet life in an old mill house near the edge of town, where the forest began. His work was good, too good, some locals said. His statues were famous for looking alive. Some swore they could see the marble breathing under the light. That spring, Ethan received an anonymous commission. A single note was slipped under his studio door, written on heavy cream paper with no name or return address. It said only, "Greater than, carve her. 12 feet tall. The bride of the sky." At first, he laughed. It had to be a prank. But when he found a heavy envelope of cash tucked beneath the note, he stopped laughing. It was more money than he'd ever been paid. He bought new tools, ordered slabs of white marble from Vermont, and started the work. The figure he created was hauntingly beautiful, a woman in a flowing gown, hands raised as if reaching for something just out of sight. He called her the giant bride. As the days passed, Ethan became obsessed. He'd work until dawn, shaping every curve, every strand of hair, until her face seemed to look back at him. There were nights when he'd wake to the sound of footsteps in the studio below, or soft humming, a melody he didn't recognize. When he'd check, the tools would be in different places. Dust would be disturbed around the statue's feet. By the time he finished, summer had turned to early fall. The locals came to see the sculpture, and many left uneasy. It wasn't just her size, it was the feeling she gave off. Some people said she seemed to breathe. Others said they could hear a whisper when they stood near her. Ethan laughed off their fears, but even he couldn't deny the strange energy that filled the studio at night. Then one evening, just after sunset, she moved. Ethan had been cleaning his tools when he heard the grinding of stone behind him. Slowly, impossibly, the giant bride turned her head. Dust fell from her shoulders like snow. Her stone eyes blinked. He stumbled backward, heart pounding. The marble shifted, cracked, and then the cracks healed as if they'd never been there. She stepped forward, bare feet echoing like thunder across the floor. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice deep and distant, like wind through a canyon. He couldn't answer. He wanted to scream, to run, but his body wouldn't obey. "I'm taking my clothes off," she whispered, fingers reaching for the folds of her marble gown. "Don't," he said, voice barely audible. But she did, and as the fabric fell, so did his strength. His knees locked. He couldn't move. He couldn't even blink. The air shimmered, and the marble turned translucent. Underneath was light, living light, swirling like liquid stars. When the brilliance faded, she stood before him, no longer marble, but flesh. Her skin was pale as moonlight, her eyes gray and endless. She smiled faintly, almost shyly, like someone waking from a long dream. "Do you remember me?" she asked. He didn't. He shook his head, trembling. "You made me once before," she said. "Long ago, before you were this." Her words made no sense. He thought he was dreaming, hallucinating. But the warmth radiating from her was real. The scent of stone dust and ozone filled the air. She stepped closer. "You promised to finish me. You said you'd never leave me half alive." He tried to speak but found his voice gone. His mind raced. What was she talking about? Was this a curse? A miracle? Outside, thunder rolled over the valley. The power flickered, and in that flash of darkness, she disappeared. When the lights came back, the statue stood in its place again, silent, unmoving, but different. Her eyes now looked sad. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat in his chair, staring at the statue until dawn. He told himself it was a trick of exhaustion, maybe a dream born of too much isolation. But deep down, he knew something had changed. Over the next week, strange things began happening around Aspen Hollow. The church bell rang at odd hours, midnight, 3 a.m., though no one pulled the rope. Animals vanished from the woods. And people said they saw a tall figure walking the streets at night, dressed in white, leaving footprints that glowed faintly before fading away. Ethan tried to work again, to distract himself, but his tools wouldn't cooperate. The marble resisted him, crumbling under his chisel as if rejecting his touch. Every sound in the studio felt amplified, the ticking clock, the scrape of metal on stone, the whisper of wind through the window. Then, one night, he woke to find her standing by his bed. The giant bride. Her gown was gone. She looked almost human now, smaller, softer, but her presence filled the room like a storm. "You made me," she said again, "and you abandoned me." Ethan's breath caught. "What are you?" "A memory," she replied, "and a warning." She reached out a hand, fingers cool against his cheek. "You were once like me, part of the light. But you chose the world of dust. You forgot who you were." He shook his head. "This isn't real." She smiled sadly. "That's what they all say." And then she vanished again, leaving behind the faint scent of rain and stone. The next morning, Ethan packed his things. He was leaving Aspen Hollow, leaving the statue, leaving the madness behind. But as he loaded his truck, he saw something that made him freeze. The giant bride stood at the edge of the forest, watching him. Her face unreadable. He climbed into the truck and started the engine, but when he looked in the mirror, she was gone. By the time he reached the highway, he felt calmer. The town disappeared behind him, swallowed by fog. Maybe it had all been in his head. Maybe he'd gone too long without sleep. He turned on the radio to steady his nerves. Static. Then a voice. It was hers. "Do not run from what you created," she whispered through the speakers. "You are still mine." The truck swerved. He slammed on the brakes, heart hammering. The road was empty, stretching endlessly into the mist. But when he stepped out, he saw footprints again, large, glowing faintly, leading off the asphalt and into the trees. He followed them. Deep in the woods, the air grew colder, heavier. He could hear water rushing somewhere nearby, though he knew there were no rivers this far up. The trail led him to a clearing, and there she was, waiting beside a stone altar that hadn't been there before. "You came back," she said softly. "I had to," he whispered. "Then it's time," she said, lifting her hand. "To remember." The light burst around them like 1,000 suns. For a moment, he saw fragments, memories that weren't his. A city made of marble towers, skies burning gold, a promise spoken under a storm. "I will finish you. I will make you whole." And then it was gone. The forest was dark again. He stood alone beside the statue, the same statue he had carved, motionless once more. Only this time, her expression had changed. She was smiling. He drove back to his studio in silence, unable to speak, unable to think. He didn't remember how he got home. All he knew was that the sculpture now seemed complete, perfect, alive in a way that defied explanation. The locals still tell the story of that night. They say you can see the giant bride glowing faintly when the moon is full, and if you listen closely, you'll hear her whisper, "Don't forget what you made." And that's only the beginning of what would become one of the strangest, most whispered stories in Colorado's history, a story that some still claim is true. Ethan didn't sleep for 3 days after the encounter in the woods. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, tall, radiant, watching him from the edge of his memory. The giant bride wasn't just a statue anymore. She was a presence, a shadow that lingered in his studio, in his reflection, in the air itself. He tried to work again, but his hands trembled too much. His sculptures cracked, tools slipped, and marble shattered as if rejecting him. The studio that had once been his sanctuary now felt alive, breathing softly in the dark. The town of Aspen Hollow began to notice changes too. Strange lights shimmered above the mountains at night, like silent lightning. The air would hum for minutes at a time, setting dogs barking and glass trembling in windows. A few townspeople disappeared, an elderly couple, a hunter, a girl walking home from school. Their houses were found empty, doors unlocked, dinner still on the table. The sheriff blamed bears, then wild weather, then stopped answering questions altogether. But those who lived close to the forest said they knew. They said the bride was calling them. Ethan told himself none of it was his fault. He hadn't meant to create her. He hadn't known his hands could wake something that shouldn't have been asleep. Yet deep down, he remembered her words, "You promised to finish me. You said you'd never leave me half alive." The phrase repeated in his head like a prayer. He stopped answering calls, stopped eating, stopped leaving the house. All he did was stare at the statue, waiting for it to move again. It happened one night in late October. Rain hammered the roof, and thunder rolled over the valley. Ethan sat at his desk, sketching her face for the 1000th time. He didn't hear the footsteps at first, slow, deliberate, echoing faintly from the back of the studio. Then came the voice, soft as silk but filled with something ancient. "You never finished the heart." He turned slowly. The giant bride stood there again, dripping with rain, eyes glowing with faint silver light. She looked smaller than before, human-sized, but her presence filled the room like a storm about to break. He tried to speak, but his throat tightened. "What do you want from me?" Her expression softened. "To remember what you are." "I'm no one," he said. "Just a man." "No," she whispered, stepping closer. "You were the sculptor of light before you fell into stone. You shaped worlds before you chose to shape marble. You forgot that, but I never did." Ethan shook his head, backing away. "You're not real. You're something I made." "Yes," she said gently. "And everything you make remembers you." She raised her hand, and suddenly the air shimmered. The studio walls rippled, bending like reflections on water. The smell of rain turned to the scent of cold stone and lightning. The world around him shifted. He wasn't in the studio anymore. He stood in a vast white plain under a sky filled with moving stars. In the distance, colossal figures walked, statues that breathed, their eyes shining with inner fire. They were all sculptures like his, alive and luminous. "This is where you began," she said. "Before the fall. Before you forgot the craft of the heavens." He felt dizzy. "No, I don't belong here." "You do," she said. "You made me here once, and when you fell to earth, I followed. I waited centuries for you to remember." Ethan fell to his knees. "Why bring me back now?" "Because the world is forgetting its makers," she said. "And if you forget too, all of this will vanish." The ground trembled beneath them, a low vibration that felt like the heartbeat of something immense. Cracks opened across the plain, and light spilled upward like molten gold. The bride knelt beside him, touching his shoulder. "The choice is yours. Stay here and become what you were again, or return and live as dust." He looked at her, eyes wide. "And you?" She smiled faintly. "I will stay. My time is done." He reached out, grasping her hand. "You can come with me." She shook her head. "I was never meant to walk where you walk. I was meant to remind you." The light flared brighter, wrapping around them both. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no pain, just warmth and memory. When he opened them again, he was lying on the floor of his studio. The rain had stopped. The air was still. The statue stood before him, unchanged, yet her expression was peaceful now. The sadness in her eyes was gone. He tried to stand but felt weak. His hand brushed against the marble base, and he gasped. The stone was warm. Not like before, alive, warm, like skin. He felt a pulse beneath it, faint and rhythmic. The statue's chest glowed softly for a moment, then dimmed again, as if breathing once more before returning to silence. For the first time in months, Ethan smiled. He understood now. She hadn't cursed him. She had completed him. In the following weeks, Aspen Hollow slowly returned to normal. The disappearances stopped, the lights in the mountains faded, and the air felt lighter somehow. People said it was just the season changing, but a few knew better. They'd pass Ethan's studio and see him through the window, working again, calmer, focused, and almost serene. The giant bride still stood in the center of the room, but her presence no longer frightened anyone. She was simply there, a guardian of silence and memory. One evening, as snow began to fall, Ethan received another letter. This one had no cache, no instructions, only a short message written in delicate handwriting. Greater than, you kept your promise. Thank you. He placed it beside his tools and went back to work, carving something new. A figure smaller than before, a child, hands raised toward the sky, carved from the same stone as the bride. He worked for weeks without rest, and when it was done, he placed the sculpture beside hers. The two seemed to face each other, a mother and child made of light trapped in marble. That winter, Ethan fell ill. The doctor from town visited twice and said it was exhaustion, that he needed rest and food. But Ethan only smiled. "I'm fine," he said. "I've finally finished what I started." One morning, the sheriff found the studio door unlocked. Inside, the tools were neatly arranged, the fire had burned out, and Ethan was gone. No sign of struggle, no footprints in the snow, just the sculptures, the giant bride and the child, glowing faintly in the pale dawn light. People searched for him for weeks, combing the forest and nearby rivers, but there was nothing to find. It was as if he had vanished into the mist. Years passed, and the story faded into local legend. The studio became part of the town's folklore, the sculptor who disappeared into his art. Tourists came and went, whispering stories about the statue that looked different every time. You saw it. Some said they could see two figures inside the marble when the moon was full, a man and a woman standing hand in hand, surrounded by light. One autumn evening, a filmmaker from Denver named Clara Torres visited Aspen Hollow to shoot a short documentary for her YouTube channel, Whisper of the Past. She'd heard the rumors, the ghost stories, the local myths about the giant bride. She didn't believe them, but she loved the drama of it all. She set up her camera in the abandoned studio, dust motes swirling in her flashlight beam, and began to record her intro. "I'm taking my clothes off," she read aloud from the old newspaper quote she'd found in the archives, chuckling nervously. Said the giant bride. "Don't," he told her. But she did, and he couldn't move. She paused, lowering the script. "Creepy, right?" She smiled at the camera. Witness this unbelievable true inspired story right here on Whisper of the Past. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Let's get started. As she spoke, something shifted behind her. A faint sound, stone moving, almost breathing. She froze, turning slowly. The giant bride stood as still as always, but the child statue beside her seemed different. Its head was tilted now, eyes turned toward Clara. Her pulse quickened. "Okay," she whispered, half laughing. "Who moved that?" The camera flickered. A soft light filled the studio. For a heartbeat, she saw them, the man, the woman, and the child, standing together, not stone but flesh and light. The woman looked at her and smiled, the same calm, ancient smile Ethan had seen. Then the lights went out. When the video uploaded 2 days later, automatically scheduled, Clara's last post, it was incomplete, ending right after her introduction. But in the final frame, just before the screen cut to black, a faint whisper could be heard. "Remember what you make." No one ever found Clara Torres. The studio in Aspen Hollow remains locked now, sealed by the town council. But locals say that on quiet nights, when the wind is right and the moon is high, you can still hear faint chisel sounds coming from inside, like someone carving something new, something beautiful, something waiting to wake again.